All right. Record has been hit. Happy Tuesday, friends. Welcome to Eastern Daylight Savings Time. I wonder if everybody else has had as hard a time with it as, well, I might have had. We're so happy to see all of you here on screen, both new and familiar faces. My name is Helen Blyer. For those of you who do not know me, I serve as the director of the Center for Lifelong Learning at Columbia Theological Seminary here in beautiful Spring Lake, Decatur, Georgia, and I lead the brilliant group of people who provide executive direction for ALM, the Association of Leaders in Lifelong Learning for Ministry. You're going to be meeting one of those good people in just a moment. ALM is the community of practice, think tank, resource provider, and advocate for leaders in lifelong learning for ministry. We cast a broad net. Our members include everyone across theological schools, denominational offices. Rebecca, I see you here on the screen, and freestanding lifelong learning providers. While our members are largely from Christian-based communities, they're not exclusively so. We work to serve all people who are extending the ecosystem of theological education, broadly speaking, into areas outside of formalized degree programs and credit-bearing offerings. So if you're not working primarily in a credit-bearing or degree program situation, but you're doing education for ministry, you belong in our tribe. If you feel like you'd appreciate conversation partners who get the distinctiveness of the work that you do and want to support the creation and provision of resources for this work, we encourage you to join us. I'm going to drop some information into the chat pod if you're interested in learning more, including my personal contact information. It's our pleasure to offer this series of monthly webinars on topics related to the work of lifelong learning to all who are interested. Next month, we're going to be looking at how to think through creating a sustainable economic model for a lifelong learning program. This is something our members have repeatedly asked for. As you can imagine, with the diversity of contexts in which people do this work, it's really impossible to come up with a one-size-fits-all or even a three-part sizing scheme that helps people think tactically about an economic model. So what we're going to do is have a guide for how to think about developing one in the person of Bob Landreby, who has spent more than 40 years helping nonprofits and theological schools align mission and money. He has served in senior leadership roles at World Relief, at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary, and at Asbury Theological School. It's a conversation you're not going to want to miss. That will be on April 16th at 3 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time. We haven't put the announcement yet up on the webinar, but I will be putting it there by the end of the week and emailing everybody who is connected through our membership to the contact information or the registration information, excuse me, for that webinar. And the last one of our academic season is going to be May 13th at 12 noon Eastern Daylight Time. It's going to provide a historic overview of the development of lifelong learning for ministry and invite participants to think strategically about the role their own program plays in that overall history and what future they might want to envision for their program. And I'll be leading that conversation. We're also in the process of updating and moving our website to a different platform, so thanks for your patience as we work through details and inevitable hiccups. And now our guest today, the Reverend Tay Moss, is likely familiar to you. He is a priest, a technologist, and a systems architect based out of Toronto, working on the edge of faith and technology. He currently heads up Innovative Ministry Program and the Church X e-learning platform at TUCC, and he's launching into his own initiative. He can probably say a word about that. And he serves on the exec team for Alim. So welcome, Tay. Over to you. I'm sure we've got a full hour.
Thank you very much, Helen. And if you wouldn't mind spotlighting me, that would be great. Yeah, so as Helen said, I'm up here in Toronto, and I work for a nonprofit up here that does resourcing for different congregations and seminaries and things like this. And I do have a new venture called Laporia Software that does custom software for seminaries and other groups that need that kind of support. So I'm going to turn on my slide deck here. And so this is leading change with clarity, navigating evolving challenges with adaptive leadership. Or more precise, more succinctly, adaptive versus technical change. So the session's designed to provide leaders of lifelong learning in ministry with a framework to distinguish between the technical problems that we all face and the adaptive challenges that we also all face, which we think is a crucial background for navigating the evolving landscape of theological education. So we're going to explore some of those diagnostic tools and some practical next steps that you can implement. So the first point to make is just a little bit of context, right? Like all of our schools and affiliated institutions are seeing an enormous degree of change in many different ways. One kind of obvious thing for a lot of us here in this room is a 22% increase in non-degree enrollment across all ATS schools between 2023 and 2024. And Helen's a little more dialed in on the data than me, but I believe can validate that this has continued to trend that direction. So what we're seeing is that people are shifting how they wish to receive their educational content, how they wish to receive their educational content for theology and ministry purposes. My own anecdotal gathering of evidence would be like I know a lot of people now that are getting ordained through non-accredited programs or through certificates or what I call Franken degrees, where a bishop will say, "Oh, I see you're kind of light on Bible, so go take some scripture and then go do this and go do this." And it's kind of a adjudicatory official, a bishop, who's essentially acting as a kind of accrediting authority, if you will. And like I know somebody who is the dean of something called the Bishop Kemper School in Kansas, and they're a non-ATS school. And I found out the other day that they're the second largest producers of priests in the Episcopal Church in the U.S. after Virginia Theological Seminary, and that's just fascinating because they're way under the radar. They don't have, they have very few faculty, and they was entirely online and have been for decades. So some really interesting trends that we see. Just to continue that, 24% increase in non-degree enrollment across U.S. schools. 40% of non-degree students are over the age of 40, which is an interesting trend that we're seeing. People coming back to education, not necessarily because it is a qualifying degree for professional service that they have to take, but because they are genuinely theologically curious. That's another thing we see, or who believe these tools are important for the work that they've been doing for a long time already. So maybe they've already been doing ministry, but now they're coming to realize that maybe they need some specialized tools or background. So um, yeah, and just 33% are over the age of 50, if you can imagine. That's a really incredible stat about who we're talking about. So with all that change happening, these tools, I'm hoping this discussion will be helpful to you. We have a couple goals. First, I want to clarify the conceptual difference between technical problems and adaptive challenges. Second, I want to apply that lens of technical versus adaptive to theological education contexts. And then I want to try using at least two team-based discernment tools for adaptive leadership practice and to practice diagnosing some real challenges and create conversation questions and even inspire you to try some small learning experiment in your context. So, many of you will know adaptive leadership as a general name for a constellation of different ideas, originally coined by Ronald Heifetz. I wonder if people just in the chat or just with a thumbs up, like who's heard of adaptive leadership before? I'm guessing it's going to be most of you or a lot of you. Okay, yeah, two, three. Okay, cool. Yeah, it's a really popular framework because it helps to distinguish between the kinds of changes that require significant cultural change in an organization and those things that frankly are much more of a technical kind of problem. So you see, I have this little Holy Trinity icon that I made using an AI of the three kind of main key thinkers of that school. Ronald Heifetz, who founded the framework, Mary Linsky, who worked out some of the practical leadership applications, and Alexander Grashow, who worked on how that is then implemented in organizational structures. And my plan is that after the session is concluded, we'll send out an email with a little bit more of a bibliography with actual citations of the books that they have read. All right, so our agenda is to do this framing that we just did. We're going to start talking about distinctions and diagnosis, and then we're going to move on to application and discussion in a breakout group, and then we're going to do some tools and a debrief of our time together, and then just asking you as a checkout item to identify something that would be a next step in the place where you're at. So technical versus adaptive change, core definitions. There are many problems that we might face in our work, some of which we may characterize as being technical problems because they have a very clear definition and known solutions. And we can implement those solutions through existing expertise, procedures, resources. And the focus is very much on fixing with current know-how or external resources. That is contrasted with adaptive challenges, which require learning to define the problem and solution, involve changes in priorities, beliefs, habits, loyalties. And usually it's characteristic that stakeholders actually have to build capacity to do the thing that needs to be doing to adapt to the new circumstance. Here I'm going to caveat this by saying that adaptive leadership theory works really well with a lot of other theories that we might be wanting to use. An example might be, the missional cycle that Alan Roxburgh worked up. And the idea there is that churches or even just any organization will go through a phase where it's highly innovative and it adapts to its circumstance and it creates the things it needs. And then it kind of stays in there, but then all the circumstances change underneath it. And there becomes this misalignment between what the organization is prepared to do or knows how to do and what's actually needed. And it gets worse and worse. And then people start misbehaving and acting anxious and things because they become kind of more and more aware of the mismatch. And then eventually a crisis is achieved. And then in that crisis, they have to sort of tear everything down and start over and innovate again and go through this cycle like this. And I've certainly seen that pattern a lot in organizations that I've been a part of. So it works well with that theory. I'd also say this pairs well with social constructivist theories of learning with Jack Mesirow. It definitely sort of where the idea is that learning takes place when we encounter the kind of sense of crisis or need to change, and that it happens in a kind of social construct. That it's somehow when we're gathering with our colleagues and addressing the problem that we have, that's when real transformation can happen. Agree completely. Another theory that it works really well with. Uh, there's another one there in my mind. It'll come to me later. Anyway, it works well with a lot of other existing theories that you might want to slot this into about how organizational structures work and leadership works. All right. So there's some classic errors that organizations fall into. The big one is tending to treat adaptive challenges as though they were technical problems. This is a common failure mode. And what it looks like is overinvesting in structural fixes like new committees, projects, or tools without addressing the underlying value conflicts or identity shifts that are necessary. In essence, it's avoiding the harder organizational work of surfacing losses and negotiating identity by trying to substitute some kind of quick fix. And a classic example from our field lately is I have been hearing anecdotally that a lot of schools are changing their learning management systems, and in some cases are kind of serially going to a new system, a new system, a new system. And someone I know said to me that the issue seems to be actually not that the LMSs can't do what they want them to do, but the staff either don't have the time or the training to do the things that they want to do. And so that's actually more of a cultural problem, than it is, about how staff is trained, than it is about something like the actual technical capability of the platform. But I have certainly seen this. I can remember like many years ago, I was doing social work and my boss asked me to create a database system to track stats, and I did. But even from the beginning, I was like, this is not going to work very well because the person who'd be asked to use it was not a technical user at all and didn't really need a database. What they needed was a piece of paper that they could make little check marks on, right? And that was what they had been using, and it's what they defaulted back to after I left. And I knew that was going to happen because the culture of the institution was not one that demanded her to learn those technical skills, or in fact, they really needed her to learn those technical skills. So, not making that mistake of mistaking technical versus adaptive change is a critical task. Um, yeah, absolutely. So, all right. So, how do we diagnose the difference? For this exercise, what I want you to do is to reflect, and I'm going to ask you to put something in the chat in a minute. Reflect on a challenge that you're currently leading your organization through in some capacity. So, what is a challenge that you currently face? And then I want you to consider whether it's mainly a technical fix that's kind of clear or an adaptive one that's going to require learning and change at a cultural level, or if it's a mix of both. And there's no shame if you're not sure. The goal here is just to get kind of toward a better way of thinking about it, not to sort of have a firm answer at this point. So we're just going to pull that in the chat. So in the chat, just with like one sentence, try to name something that's a challenge your organization is facing, and then whether it's an adaptive or technical change, and then maybe why. And let's just give you a minute to do that. While you do that, I'm going to name one or two other ways that people um, will act badly in the face of these challenges. One of which is they will start to exhibit a high degree of ownership over things and projects. So become very territorial, like you can't change my program or you can't touch my budget. Those kinds of attitudes can be reflective of that. Make work is another example where, oh, we need a committee to study that and we need to report on that is a way. Another can be hiring outside expertise to tell you stuff that you actually already know anyway. But somehow hiring external expertise makes it feel like you're trying to buy the solution to the problem when you really knew what the problem was all along. Mhm. So let's see what some of these come back as. Different styles of learning based on culture. Yeah, creating adaptive. Yep. Membership tracking. Steep drop in seminary degree enrollment. Adaptive. Yep. Carving out the place of lifelong learning in a radically changing seminary. Yes, I think a lot of you would probably have that story. Many users in non-credit programs chasing a new marketing director without addressing the cultural change necessary. Yes, yes. Decreased enrollment, definitely adaptive. Yeah, I mean, I'll tell an anecdote as people are doing that. I was talking to a seminary. This is like 3 or 4 years ago, so it's kind of early in the pandemic and everything. And they were telling me that in order for them to come onto my platform, I had to guarantee a certain amount of enrollment in their lifelong learning. And I said, what would be considered success for you? And they're like, well, at least 10 or 12 people. I said, you mean 10 or 12 people per course? They're like, yeah, that'll be our minimum. You got to guarantee us that. So I was looking at their catalog and realized right away some of the problems they were up against. They were advertising courses with titles like the Old Testament, and there was no like description to explain this is for people that already have an MDiv and are coming back for education. Is this for people that have never done a degree at all in theological studies? There's no context. And also, I said to the guy, "You're also up against every other Bible introduction course on the internet." So I said, this isn't really, a technical problem of what advertising platform you're using or something. This is a problem about how you even conceive of what you're doing and how you're messaging that out to the world. So what are some other ones? Record keeping. Yeah, so record keeping. So Mirta, would you think that that was a technical challenge or adaptive challenge or both in your case? Both. Yeah. Yeah, probably. Because, garbage in, garbage out. You can create the most elegant record keeping system in the world, but if people don't want to use it or they use it poorly, you're stuck. Hmm. Yeah, and that's often the case with things that we face. They're both things often. Yeah. Hmm. But you're lucky when it's just a technical change. Getting a Zoom license that has more capacity on it or something. That's nice. Yeah, excellent. Okay. So, all right. So, from this, we might sort of surface some diagnostic cues that you might think about, such as who's the one who's doing the work anyway? Is it some sort of authority or expert in the system, whether internal or external, or is it the stakeholders whom the change most affects? Second, you might ask, what are the losses that are likely if we make this change? Status, identity, competence, cherished practices. And because if you can identify the losses that are going to be happening with whatever change that you're facing, that helps to identify where the resistance is going to be. And like any other grief work, if you can start to get people to tell their stories about what they're losing, they can begin to work through that and come toward resurrection. It's important to kind of front that even when programs die, they can't be resurrected in other forms. And so things that people may actually cherish, like the transformation of students, may still happen just in a different form than what they're used to. So sometimes getting people to make that conceptual shift is really the challenge and is really important. So sometimes in organizations, you just got to be patient with people and get them to tell the story again and again. And sometimes you just have to strategically retire people. That happens too. So, yeah. Point of grief. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Um, Another thing to look at is the work avoidance patterns. I already named a couple, like endless committees and things like this. I wonder if the group could name a couple of work avoidance things where people, instead of making the hard choices or doing the hard learning, are actually avoiding it altogether with one strategy or another, um, playing solitaire on their laptops or something. Let's maybe we'll unmute it if somebody wants to mention one or two. Anybody want to raise your hand and name a work
Oh, I
avoidance?
love this. Engaging in a strategic planning process. Oh, yeah. Referred to a different
That's so
community.
funny.
Uh-huh.
Hmm.
Better marketing. We've found like doing evaluations and sending out surveys. Don't get me wrong, evaluation and assessment is really important, but it can be a stopgap measure to keep people from making hard decisions.
Hmm. I agree
Um,
completely.
I was having a conversation recently with folks who were talking about how the creation of rules and structures can actually be a way of avoiding having to make hard decisions and do hard things, because what you do is you offload the responsibility for hard choices onto a third party. Oh, it's the rules that tell us we have to act this way, or trying
Yeah.
to offload those decisions onto other structures besides the self.
Yeah. Yeah. If you've read your Friedman congregation to congregation systems theory, you're going to know that one of the things that people do in response to tension between people or between systems is to then triangulate with a third party to try to create a more stable configuration of the relationship dynamic. And so, yeah, that often looks like deferring to some kind of expertise, as though that's going to be the solution, and we can all agree that so and so is an expert, and that'll be our solution, right? That kind of triangulation, though, interestingly, can be used adroitly. The adroit use of triangles is something we try to teach people to do in the pastorate. What does that look like in leadership for this? An example is I've been reading a book called The Lean Startup about how to do software startup companies. And his main point is that the primary output that you create, and especially in the first couple of years of a startup, is actually learning. It's actually not the money you make. It's actually learning the customers and what they need and all that. And so the focus has to be not how much money did we make, but what did we learn from every successive thing that you do. And I've been thinking about that lately because he's very adroit in how he says that, the thing is, if you can create validated learning, that becomes the thing that you point at, so it kind of it kind of creates an intentional triangulation that makes things a little more stable because everybody can kind of agree that they're going towards the learning and they're not going towards each other in a way. So kind of a lean, yeah, the lean startup. Yep, exactly. All right, very good. Okay, so here's a case study, and then we're gonna pull it out in the thing. So and discuss it in the chat. So a new registration LMS system. A seminary's lifelong learning program has expanded rapidly over the past 5 years, growing from a few continuing education workshops into certificate programs, online short courses, hybrid intensives, and several hundred participants annually. As the program has grown, program directors have become increasingly frustrated with the course registration system, which requires manual staff enrollment, handles non-credit learners poorly, struggles with payment processing, and produces confusing participant records. Staff now spend hours each week managing spreadsheets, participants occasionally miss course communications, and generating reports for the dean's office is difficult. After reviewing the situation, the seminary's IT team recommends implementing a new LMS with integrated registration and automatic enrollment, track non-credit learners, and simplify reporting. A project that would involve selecting a vendor, migrating participant data, and training staff on the new system. Who here has been through this? Okay, so what do you think? Is this a technical? Is this an adaptive challenge? Let's maybe people can just unmute and just say,
If you're not in a position to be able to speak out loud, go ahead and plop
yep,
something
you can put
into
in
the
the chat.
chat. We'll
Hmm.
recognize it there. If you could bring the case study back up so we can relook at
Yeah,
it, that'd be
sure,
great.
sure.
Jill, what do you think?
I think because they've already had a learning management system and they're at the place of like, what's it say, several hundred participants, it sounds like this system isn't working. So I'm going to say technical in this situation.
Hmm. Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, others, Sarah?
Well, I would wonder if it is all technical or if there's something adaptive in that if there are modules for learning how to use the system well, and the staff is resisting using that, is that a culture issue? So I would maybe want to ask some questions.
Mhm.
Hmm. Yep. One of the things I noted in there myself is that there's a number of specific requirements that have been identified by people with the system. Like they're talking about how the payment portal doesn't work well, this doesn't work well, that doesn't work well. And the fact that the organization has gotten to the point where they can be specific about the features they want and they know what doesn't work means they have learned, right? They've learned what wasn't
Mm.
working, what they didn't
Hmm.
like. So the question would be then, does that learning require significant cultural change to implement, or can they just kind of pick something off the shelf? And what's interesting is too, there, you notice that there's an IT team, right? And I do think that it's often tempting to download these kind of tech things onto the IT team. And that creates its own set of problems because they don't necessarily know the processes of other departments. So you got to integrate that somehow, and that could be a place for Sarah to be right, where the cultural thing is really important to figure out. Yeah. Hmm. Any other comments about that particular case study, which I know is so generic but so obvious?
Yeah, I know after COVID, this applies to our seminary, that when we went pretty much distance learning, it was quite a learning curve, and the pedagogical approaches that were how can we be really effective in that space? And so there's a lot of learning that was taking place to be effective in that space, even though there's a lot of technical stuff with IT and stuff. We were interfacing with them to figure out how to deliver it well. So a little bit of
Mhm.
both and.
Yeah, yeah. And how do you encourage people to learn the new things or hold their hands when they're not going to learn the new things is kind of a critical thing to figure out. My wife is a professor at the University of Toronto, and she talked about how there were some faculty who during COVID just refused to change anything about how they did what they did. They would just have a graduate school student come in and videotape them doing the same lecture that they've been giving for 20 years, and then put it unedited on the LMS. And yeah, it's crazy. Meanwhile, my wife at the time was teaching a course on for the art school on visual design, and she had the students as a learning exercise. They had to take walks and make notes on paper, not computer, about their walks, and then as the final project, they had to build a map of their neighborhood. And they couldn't use computer tools to do it. They had to hand draw a map of their neighborhood, which told the story of what they discovered about their neighborhood through their walk. And you see what's being accomplished there is like multiple fold things. And it's a good example of kind of an adaptive approach to figuring out, well, what's the problem here? These students aren't walking outside. A straight up lecture is not going to work. How do we teach them principles of good visual design? Right. Yeah, exactly. Okay, great. All right. So next we're going to do another case study. And this time you're going to be taking this into small groups in a minute. And we're going to give you about 10 minutes to discuss this in the small groups. But this case study is this recentering mission in lifelong learning. With sustained non-degree demand in older learners, a seminary faces questions about whether lifelong learning is peripheral or core to its mission. This requires renegotiating values, roles, identities, and success metrics while managing distress and inevitable loss. And yeah, so this is going to be your case study, and then I'm going to flash up the questions that I want you to think about as well, and we'll post these into the chat in a minute. So what I'd like you to do in your breakout groups is first identify two technical and two adaptive elements in that case example, which I know is very kind of sketchy, but I think you can fill in the gaps, probably most of you, of what that would really look like. Then, second, I want you to name three stakeholder groups and what each might be facing losing. Like, what is each of these stakeholders going to lose by this potential for the lifelong learning program to take on more the center of gravity of the institution? Third, choose one adaptive leadership move that you would practice if you were a leader in this circumstance that could be accomplished in the next 30 days, let's say. And then, as the fourth thing I want you to try to do is to draft some kind of an experiment that you could do in that circumstance to produce learning. What would be the experiment that you would run? Which means that you probably need to take a step back and ask, what are you trying to learn? Right? So ask yourself, what are you trying to learn? And then how would you learn that related to this change that we're talking about? So as I said, I'll paste that in the chat in a second. So Helen, go ahead and launch the breakout. So while you do that, I will get ready to post this.
Great. And I'm going to keep an eye on the breakouts to see if there's anybody who's standing alone in their group and move you to another group. Mirta, you should have gotten an invitation to join room 2 with Jill.
I did not, but hold on for a second, 'cause I need to grab that, paste those questions.
There.
And that might need to happen
And John
from,
is I already chatted with John. He's just going to listen to us.
all right, what do I do with this? I thought I had pasted into my planning document, but I don't see it. Let's see here. Okay, here we go. I found it. Okay, let's see if I
And you'll
can
need to give
message
it
the
to me so
participants.
that I can broadcast it to all of the rooms. Whoops. Hold on. And by the adaptive case scenario, it's the same one that you presented beforehand.
Just a second ago, yeah, the one about
Okay.
lifelong learning essentially becoming the center of gravity.
Mm-hmm.
Looks like you might have gotten cut off at the last part of that.
Really?
Well, I had a little thing kind of pop up that showed some
Mm-hmm.
of that, but it stopped at shoes.
Oh, that's so strange. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't see any option for me to text into the groups. It's funny how it's got it pretty locked down for me as a oh,
Yeah, as
actually
a co-host.
I'm not actually a co-host right now. I'm just a regular Joe.
It has
Yes.
a character limit.
Yeah, so then yeah. So choose one adaptive leadership move and then draft a safe
Hmm.
experiment.
Yep.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
There.
And we started this around 3:30, I think, so good a little bit to discuss.
Hmm. All right. Is everybody popcorn's back in?
Yeah, well, welcome everybody back. And so we're going to do a little bit of a harvest of your insights here. So I'm just going to kind of open it up for some discussion, some questions that might form that discussion. Technical work, what were the clear solvable components, the things that are technical problems that can be solved pretty easily or relatively easily, versus what were the adaptive works that you identified, things that required changes in beliefs, values, relationships. Did you identify patterns of work avoidance that might distract from real issues? And then, what were some of the key takeaways that you all came up with? So I'm just going to kind of open this up for some free discussion, and let's hear what you guys discovered.
One of the things that may be an adaptive culture thing that I noticed in the case study, just to offer for your consideration, see what the other folks think too,
Mhm.
is that sometimes when the lifelong learning program becomes the tail that wags the enrollment dog in the institution, there's a little saltiness that can happen with administration as they're trying to figure out how to navigate that new landscape. Um, when you have more people interested in the not what are called the non-traditional offerings, and you've got an institutional structure that has been set up for a more traditional way of being, it causes disruption. And so the growth might not be entirely welcome by the administration. Similar things can happen in churches when you have, the traditional service on a Sunday and then the alternative service that, let's say, happens on a Sunday evening or something, and that becomes more popular or more engaging than the main service. And they start
Mhm.
saying, well, we need a bigger space or we need better technology so we can have the sound system improved or whatever. There can be a similar kind of dynamic happening. On the surface, it looks like it's a technical issue, but are there culture issues underneath?
In a similar way, maybe the culture issue where I am is related to just trying to get faculty to participate in lifelong learning. They've educated themselves to the approach of degree seeking people, and so to get it's almost like it's not a waste of time, but it feels that way when I ask, would you guys be willing to do a 4-week webinar on whatever? Well, not really, unless it happens to be something, which is great. They're already writing in a particular area, maybe, but I also say to them, but what do you think that what you're teaching would be in service to the church, in service to pastors and or lay leaders in the church? That'd be most helpful. And there's so much him hawing and everything too that it's just difficult to get them on board with thinking that's where they want to invest their time and energy.
Mhm. Yes, and to add to that, my perception of the faculty that I know is that they already feel very strained and overworked by their course loads and by all their service to the schools they're in already with committees and this and curriculum reviews and yada. And I think some of that work that they find themselves doing is because these institutions are already under stress. And so they're requiring more from their faculty, and the faculty therefore feel like they have less to give, to things that feel marginal or outside of their job description. Yeah, yeah. What are some other things that people kind of noticed in that case study? How about some experiments? Did anyone come up with any experiments that could be done?
Well,
We didn't get,
we
yeah.
didn't, it wasn't necessarily an experiment, but we talked about looking at the institution's mission statement to see
Mhm.
what it said the mission of the institution was
Mhm.
supposed to be, and if whether it already addressed something about commitment to alums, or support for the church. I didn't mention that in the small group. And I came from an institution that mission statement did both. So, but exploring the mission statement and its implications could be one way to address with multiple stakeholder groups what we are doing and what we might need to do differently.
Mhm. Yeah, some of you may know the VUCA acronym, VUCAH, for volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, and hyperconnected, which is kind of just the way of saying how crazy things are and how, like, even now, like, VUCA is no longer VUCA enough to explain the chaos that we have and how brittle systems have become. But one of the leadership principles underneath that is that in those circumstances, it's important to focus on, the core values of the mission of the organization, to strengthen the interpersonal relationships of the team, and also to work from principles rather than rules. So, in as much as you can clarify with the team by returning to a mission statement, absolutely, great idea. Mhm. Other interventions people thought of they'd want to do in that circumstance?
I think the comment I was making before about the CLL tail wagging the dog identifies some of the stakeholder groups and what each might fear losing. And listening to David, you talking about the anxiety among some of your faculty um, who don't want to be teaching or feel under stress because of all the institutional duties, this may feel like another darn thing to do. So it could be
Yes.
that a lot of the busyness that marks their lives is the accretion of technical approaches to something that requires systemic and adaptive change. And this
Yes.
just feels like another doggone thing.
Yes, especially when legacy institutions often have layer upon layer of processes,
Hmm.
and all of which no doubt had a really good reason to be there. But it creates a complexity to the whole system and a kind of like, kludging of everything together. And yeah, I agree completely. Mhm.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Well, our school's in the middle of a really crazy adaptive situation right now because they got a Lilly grant for $10 million to combine all of the theology departments of all the undergrad and graduate schools together.
Whoa. Okay.
And so in the 18 months, they're going to do that in the Church of the Nazarene. It'll be like if you get a Master of Divinity, you'll get it through, I think they're going to call it probably Nazarene Divinity School. And all the faculty from all the schools will now be a part of that program called the, I hate this term, but a theology of, or a college of theologians, they're going to call it. And when you go or sign up for a class, you'll sign up for a class. You may take it from someone at Point Loma in San Diego. You may take it from someone in Nashville at Trevecca Nazarene or wherever. You may take it from one of our professors. So in the midst of all that change, I had to go to the president and say, I'm full-time faculty. I'm the evangelism chair, so I think I'm fairly stable in that spot. But
Mhm.
is lifelong learning going to continue to exist? And he said, well, if you can be self-funded, which has never been something that's been said to us before. So you got like 24 months to figure that out. So I'm like, wow, okay then. So because it was not written into the new Lilly grant that that was going to be a part of lifelong learning was going to be a part of that. So
Mhm.
I just said to him and the dean as well that, hey, I'd rather flip the script at this point in my life. I think I'd rather be, go to just the evangelism chair, be part-time faculty and full-time with lifelong learning. And they said, let's do that. And now all of a sudden I've realized, hey, that's less secure than I thought it was going to be because I've got to generate. We have a subscription model, which is $100 a year, but I don't know what the other models are. And I'll come next week or right.
Yes,
That, yes,
next month.
next month. I'm sorry, next month to hear
Yeah.
all of that information. But it's become a little more pressurized now for me. So it was an adaptive change, but you know what, Tay, no one came off the balcony and got down on the dance floor with these folks. I mean, they
Mhm.
just made the call from up above, and then we were told as faculty later what the full implication was of all of this change. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And when the music stops, you better find a chair in that ballroom.
I'm
Otherwise, you're
excited.
out the door, right? Like,
Exactly. Right. So crazy.
Hmm.
Sorry, didn't mean to tell a big story like that.
Yeah, yeah. So let me just push you to then think of an experiment that you could do to uncover your hypothesis, which is around the pricing, that the subscription model is better than the a la carte model. So can you think of an experiment that you could run very quickly that would tell you the difference?
Well, what happens is we actually you can do the webinars. It's on a la carte basis, and
Okay.
we discount the subscription people is what we do.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we've done, but we just don't have the quantity. You're talking about, 10 to 12. We have occasionally we'll pull the right person in.
Hmm.
The other thing is it's just hard for us to put it at a price point where our people actually pay for it or bivocational small church pastors will pay for it,
Hmm.
but yet they want to hear from, this is an extreme, they want to hear from NT Wright, or something like that instead of someone else at another level of some sort, then they pay more for it. But anyway, it's just a challenge in thinking that through. But it is adaptive moment for me for sure. How do I need to think this through and figure that out for sure? So
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah, and it seems to me that the move to consolidate all of the faculties, it feels like an adaptive change, but um, or at least it looks on the surface as like an adaptive change, but it feels more technical because it's a response to shrinking and therefore there's consolidation as opposed to adaptively thinking of new models to reach new audiences with this theological content that may also
Hmm.
be a part of a future strategy. Because once you consolidate and then you shrink it more, where else is there to go? Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, thank you, Ellen. Yeah. So I'm going to kind of go through these last two slides a little bit faster and just kind of get them, try to get it done in the hour like we've
mhm,
like I said. So one is really obvious, but it's this idea that you ought to be doing an observation, interpretation, intervention kind of loop. That is to say, you need to sort of be gathering information, interpreting it, then doing something about it, and then assessing it, and so forth. And this is the classic kind of feedback loop that we do forever. But you can be systematic about it. Like, so for example, every time you run a course, you may insist structurally that you have a meeting to discuss what you learned from running that course. Right? Or that campaign for that season or whatever, and gather your staff together, buy them donuts or pizza or whatever, so everyone's nice and relaxed, and just get them to talk about what they learned, right? And make sure you have somebody or an AI note taker or something in the background to capture those learnings. Just something as simple as that can be a useful and effective tool that you ought to be doing. Another one is about deciding how you give work back to the constituents and regulate distress. And depending on, so what can happen is you can start to want to over function yourself and like provide the answers to people that you think that was what they need. And the challenge is to push it on them to come up with a solution that makes sense for their circumstance. And sometimes that requires patience and handholding and coaching. And that feels like as a leader, like it's burdensome. And why don't I just go in there and fix it for them? Right. So some of that though is about managing your own anxiety, about getting the thing done, when what you're trying to do is build capacity in people, right? So to be able to cultivate the kind of inner virtue, to be able to be patient with people is important, but also be able to challenge them, and then to develop the kind of temperature sensitivity. Because in adaptive leadership theory, there's this kind of butter zone, and if you go too hot in a system, if people are too anxious, then they start to behave badly, and their anxiety causes paralysis. And if you lower the anxiety too much and assure them the endowment will take care of everything, then you have the opposite problem. There's no desire to innovate or change. So you have to kind of keep it kind of in that zone. And how you do that is a critical leadership skill. Beyond the scope of this conversation to discuss how you form that. But anyway, as I kind of ticket out the door, what I want you to do is to, in the conversation thread that we have going in the chat, I'd like you to name one real challenge that you have in your circumstance. So this is similar to the question we had at the beginning. It can be the same thing or it could be something different. And then quickly, adaptive or technical. But then I want you to name something you're going to do about it in the next 30 days. And that could be the next conversation you need to have. That could be a 30-day experiment that you want to run. It could be something else, just not playing solitaire on your computer. Like something that is your intervention that you want to do in the next 30 days about that thing. And we're going to send out a reading list in subsequent days to this. So that's your thing. And then if anyone wants to chat while we're kind of collecting those in the chat, like wants to verbally chat while we're collecting those, we can do that as well. Yeah, Helen's going to schedule a meeting. Mhm. Okay, there's mine. All right, let's see some of these. Dave's going to develop a funding plan beyond the current Lilly grant writing. They'll guarantee a future for the LLM and seminary. So you're going to game that out, David? Like you're going to have like, year one, year two, year three, year four?
Yeah, that's I'm writing it. There's a practices grant right now that Lily has that I'm writing right now, but at that, how that goes. It's a very competitive one right now, so I may or may not get it.
Mhm.
So I got to have some other potential possibility. Yeah.
Mhm.
But yeah,
That's
Excellent.
interesting. Engage. I like that one about engaging somebody from a different culture about how authority works. Yes, that's something my organization is facing too. We've been asked about doing more resources for people from non-English as a first language cultures, and just their technology expectations are very different. Like a lot of those groups we're talking to use primarily WhatsApp to hold their community space, and so it's going to be very interesting to talk to them about how what's the culture of these WhatsApp groups. So yeah, it's a good one. Sarah has a personal deadline to finish a compilation. Yeah, sure. Murda, you need to get some stuff on behalf of your supervisor. Yeah, sure.
We'll be sending out the bibliography and some additional resources to the folks who registered for the webinar, so you'll need to pass those along to your supervisor.
hmm Yeah.
Um, I loved this point that you made too, Tay, about giving the work back to others, and not over
Mhm.
functioning. One of the things yourself that your action item to engage in conversation sparks for me is, I was a little flip in saying surveys are a delay tactic, but I do think that they are part of the greater wisdom of market analysis. Like if you're intending to develop a service, do something on behalf of a population, how much do you know about what that population really needs, how they learn, what their accessibility issues are, etc. So setting up these kinds of conversations and hearing from the end user about what their needs are is absolutely crucial. Relates to your comments, Tay, about the need to move beyond an LMS, a learning management system, to find ways to directly connect users with content and learning opportunities.
Yeah. One point I would make though about the surveys and things like this is I do see a lot of surveys that are very kind of generic, and
Hmm.
it seems as though there's no kind of hypothesis being tested behind them. It's just kind of a vacuum cleaner trying to scarf up all data,
Yeah.
like on a scale of 1 to 10, how good were the sandwiches? Uh, you know, and I think that it's better to have a little bit more intentionality and
Mhm.
say, what is the one thing we want to learn? Like, is it the timing? Is this the right time of year to do this course? Or the length of the course. Like, was this the right length and the right amount of engagement required from students?
Hmm.
Just test one thing and then have a question or a couple questions on there that get that, and then capture that and kind of highlight it is really important. Mhm.
So crucial to do that. Uh, the wisdom that I've seen in terms of asking people what their takeaways are and being really specific, like what two or three things you gained from this course, this event, this whatever,
Mhm.
will you be taking with you into your context and
Mhm.
using? Are there two things you really appreciate having experienced? Are there a couple of things that you wish had been done differently?
Mhm.
Those kinds of questions where you
Mhm.
don't just ask people if you've got a good beat and they can dance to you, but whether or not this was actually useful and a way to achieve an intended
Mhm.
outcome. We've even asked questions for people to use a Likert scale, a 1 to 5 Likert scale. It says, these are our goals. 1 to 5, did we meet the goals? And then we also ask, were these your goals as well? Because we could have hit 5 on all the goals that we intended to meet, but we get ones from the user, which means we didn't have the right goals in mind when we were designing this event. So to be able to match up our intended effort with the end user's needs and experience is really
Mhm.
crucial. Might be
I
fun
agree.
actually do a webinar on good assessment and evaluation of programs.
Yeah. To Jacqueline's point here about recognizing the older students, yeah, and you can sort of even walk further back and like there's this concept in quality control management about the 5 whys that like any sort of effect that you're trying to
Mhm.
understand why it happened, you can find a proximal cause for that very quickly. But the challenge is, can you go back even further? Well, why was that? Why was that? Why was that? So the airplane crashed. Why? Because the wing fell off. Why the wing fell off? Because the bolt fell apart. Why did the bolt fall apart? Because it wasn't inspected. Why wasn't it inspected? Because they didn't have money to pay the inspectors and they lied on the paperwork. It's like, can you go back in the chain to discover the causality? So it'd be similar, when we look at an effect like dropping enrollment for traditional MDivs or something like that, like yeah, at a particular school. Like why? And they say, oh, it's because there's a mismatch between the denomination's expectations of what people need for ordained ministry has changed, and so they don't need these degrees anymore. Well, go back. Well, why is that the case? And then, you can go back and back and back. And that's one of the ways you can try to capture some of that learning as well, the deeper learning. Very good. Well, thank you all very much. As Helen said, we will send something out to people. And look, I only went like 2 minutes over, Helen. Yay!
Yay! No, this is great. There's so much to think about and do. Once again, I my email address, which I will be putting in the chat over here. Contact me if you've got questions about membership or anything else that might tickle your fancy about Alam. We are here to serve you. One of the things that we're seeing, which I think is also raised by some of David's comments here, is the need to provide good information to help people be advocates for their own programs within their host institutions. So the work of advocacy has become a central focus of Alam's understanding of the coming year's strategic work. So join us. Once again, is April 16th at 3 o'clock. Bob Landreby is going to be here to provide you with first level thinking about how to approach the development of a sustainable economic system within your institution. And then May 13th at noon, I'll be leading folks on a little historic walk through the development of lifelong learning and invite people to think strategically now that you're a little bit more experienced in adaptive thinking about what the preferred future for your program should be. Tay, it's always good to have you on screen. Thanks so much. Take care.